Sonic the Hedgehog was a big time hit in the early 90s. His unique brand of speed and attitude was the perfect contrast to the much more laid back Super Mario franchise that ruled over the gaming landscape ever since 1985. However, as the decade went on, Sonic's high level of fame was gradually starting to fade. So for the next entry in the franchise, it was clear that playing it safe wasn't an option. Sonic 3 had to go big. A much more complex narrative, a brand new setting that naturally connected each zone together beautifully with seamless zone transitions. A new facing town that was much more layered, the most zones ever in a Sonic game. A project so complex that it was eventually split into 2 games to tie in with a McDonald's promotion. Hell, there were even plans of a fully 3D adventure all the way back in 1994, 2 years before Super Mario 64. Sonic the Hedgehog 3 was going to be the most ambitious Sonic adventure yet, taking the series to new heights that would absolutely trump all the previous entries. While Sonic 3 was the climax of Sonic's iconic run on the Sega Genesis, it also marked the end of an era, as the series would never be the same following its release. The scope that Sonic 3 set in place would continue to be pushed with each entry all the way up to this very day. Nobody knew it at the time, but Sonic 3 acted as a final hurrah for the Sega Genesis and the era where the iconic blue hedgehog became an icon. So to cap off Sonic's run on the console, let's look back to see how Sonic's final hurrah on the Sega Genesis holds up today. This is a Sonic the Hedgehog 3 and Knuckles retrospective. From the offset, Sonic 3 does a wonderful job at subverting your expectations. Sonic goes super at the beginning, which was previously held exclusive to the ending credits and a 100% reward. While in this state, Sonic is completely invincible. But here comes this guy who is able to knock the Chaos Emeralds out of you and runs away with them, immediately creating intrigue. Who is this guy and why does he have a problem with us? Well, you better go after him. That guy turns out to be Knuckles the Echidna, guardian of the Master Emerald. And now since he thinks you're the bad guy and this is his home, he's always one step ahead of you, constantly messing with you, really upping the stakes dramatically, as you aren't just up against Eggman, but this new guy who has it out for you. Later on we find out he was tricked by Eggman, and once he figures this out, he then helps you out. A simple story, but does wonders to make this adventure feel the grandest yet. Sonic 3's ambition is showcased beautifully in the beginning zone, Angel Island, combining the best elements of Green Hill and Palm Tree Panic. The free path structure stays true. Top is the fastest but hardest to maintain. The bottom path is more hazardous but will house a great deal of secrets for the players who want to explore, and the middle path is a mix of the two. But now with the addition of the increased verticality of Palm Tree Panic, the zone is huge in scope. It seems like a new pathway comes up every 5 seconds, really selling the idea to the player that this is the biggest Sonic adventure yet. Just when you think the act would end, it keeps going. Now the whole island is engulfed in flames, and the zone becomes way more ominous. A beautiful jungle paradise turned into a fiery wasteland, letting you know that Eggman will stop at nothing to stop you interfering in his plans. He'll even set his new allies' home on fire. This certainly isn't the same vibe as Green Hill Zone, that's for sure. Once you do finish Act 1, Act 2 simply just starts from where you are, no fading to black needed. 2 carries over that claustrophobic feel of the fiery hellscape that Act 1 ended on. Gives the vibe that you need to escape as fast as possible. It's a dense jungle that has become a shell of its former self. It is here where you'll come across Sonic 3's brand new gimmick, the elemental shields. There are 3 kinds. A fire shield that gives you an air boost and immunity to fire projectiles, useful in zones like Flying Battery. The electric shield, which attracts rings to Sonic like a magnet, and much more usefully, a double jump, handy for some vertical platforming sections. And finally, the bubble shield, with the very useful ability to breathe underwater, basically a necessity in zones like Hydrocity. Also, it negates many projectiles even when on land, and you can do this. Out of the 3, I would say the electric is my favorite, as the fire is pretty situational, and while I would say the bubble shield is the one that is the most useful for when you need it, because of that, it is also pretty situational, only really viable underwater, as when on land, its abilities become pretty useless. On the other hand, the electric shield is always handy no matter what. A double jump is just so handy to have at all times. The only shield that I feel enhances Sonic's movement for the better, as the fire shield can have the tendency to just leave you open to a per hit. Along with the newly added elemental shield, Sonic now has a brand new move, the Insta Shield, basically functioning as a parry that allows you to defeat what would be previously invincible enemies with a specific timing. Despite being a pretty minimal addition, I will say I'm certainly a fan. This move basically fixes a problem that was present in all the other games, where some enemies were just invincible, and it just sucked. Sonic 1 especially could have really benefited from this, my lord. And the timing isn't easy, so it does take some skill to get down. Speaking of enhancements to Sonic's gameplay, I am so happy to say that Sonic 3 absolutely nails special stage entry points. Back in Sonic 1, I felt the system was way too harsh in only letting you have 10 entries, meaning you could only mess up a maximum of 4 times. Not to mention that just getting to the end of an act with 50 rings got more and more unlikely, with the cheap enemy placement and level design that wasn't afraid to blindside you in a very unfair manner. Sonic 2 was a huge improvement in this regard, keeping the 50 ring requirement but letting you access them through a checkpoint, meaning a ton more entries were available. Then Sonic CD took a step backwards and went back to Sonic 1's approach, which I felt was fine for that game, but I'm so glad they decided to change it up for the next go around. Sonic 3 takes the giant rings from Sonic 1 and scatters them everywhere across each zone, stripping away the 50 ring requirement and instead making them exclusively as a reward for exploration. And while this does mean that rings do lose a good chunk of their value that Sonic 1 and 2 possessed, I really don't care that much because this is simply a much better system, making the challenge about exploration rather than hoping nothing pops up to ruin your day. This turns Angel Island into a treasure hunt of sorts, becomes a game of figuring out the most efficient path of traveling between each giant ring. It's such a blast. Continuing this theme of nice things I have to say, Sonic 3 has to have my favorite set of special stages. Blue Spheres is the name of the game. Touch all the blue spheres to get a Chaos Emerald. When you touch a blue sphere it becomes red, watch out for the red spheres. Completing a loop of blue spheres will turn them all into rings. And yellow spheres acting like springs. The stage starts slow and easy, but the longer you take, the faster and more stressful it becomes. The music also gets way more crazy, making the room for error a whole lot smaller. Personally, I like the risk vs reward game you can play if you decide to not do a loop, instead choosing to make each blue sphere red, meaning there'll be less blue spheres you have to touch, and therefore you'll be done with the special stages quicker. It's weird because I always thought you have to touch every blue sphere, but I tried doing runs where I would touch every blue sphere without turning any into rings, and a different run where I did do loops to turn them all into rings, and I was able to get Chaos Emeralds on both runs. So I guess you don't have to touch all of them? I don't know, it's weird. While simple, the special stages are still difficult to remain engaging, but blue spheres rises above the rest for me because the difficulty is fair, rather than coming from a really janky perspective that felt like my losses weren't always my fault, which is a problem that I had with each of the previous 3 special stage types. Also, when you're on those last few blue spheres, it can be really confusing on where they are. Some sort of like hot or cold indicator would have been much appreciated. This is where the grid aesthetic can become really confusing. As everything blends together, you just gotta kinda hope you haven't gone down this path before. Also, they may be perhaps a little bit too easy. Though even despite just saying that, I did manage to mess up a few times. I'm just saying, blue spheres ain't perfect, but it's not too far off from my ideal Sonic special stage. Fair, a gradual difficulty curve, and not overly gimmicky. Of course, after obtaining all 7 Chaos Elements, you can become Super Sonic. So glad for him to be back. It felt so weird with no super form in CD. Hydrocity acts as a beautiful follow-up to Angel Island, in what is perhaps the perfect example on how a water level can be done right in a Sonic game. Like Aquatic Ruin, you are never in the water for very long for it to become stale. The level always knows when to shoot you up and when to send you back to cool things down. Because of this, Hydrocity feels way more chemical plant than Labyrinth. The similarities are honestly insane sometimes. However, one thing I will say Hydrocity does improve that puts it above Aquatic Ruin is the underwater gameplay. For as good as that zone was, the underwater gameplay wasn't much to write home about. It felt slow and stiff, and the use of insta-kill crushing showed that even though it was a huge improvement over Labyrinth, it still wasn't free of the garbage that made Labyrinth Zone so infamous. Here in Hydrocity, while you can't necessarily avoid the water, I don't have a problem with this because the underwater gameplay is something I enjoy rather than something I dread, which is something that even Aquatic Ruin couldn't say. This is because the level design doesn't take a hit despite the change of gameplay. It feels like they decided to take the level design of Angel Island and chuck it 50 feet under. Secrets are found everywhere, and the higher you go, the more you'll be rewarded, and therefore, the less water you'll have to experience. Act 2 goes even further into the speed. Once again, it beautifully balances fast and slow segments, so you will never get tired of either. Though I do think it is a tad over-reliant on these slow cylinder blocks. I don't have a problem with them in sections like these, where they are brief, but as the act goes on, they become much more jarring. Like, this could be mistaken for a section of Marble Zone, and that is certainly not a good sign. Overall, I have to say I'm very impressed with Hydrocity. It managed to take the dreaded water level motif and make it a zone that you would anticipate with excitement rather than dread. It doesn't let the fact that it's a water level negatively affect its level design. It's just as richly packed as Angel Island. On top of this, also upping the spectacle and speed tenfold. A slam dunk of a zone that really showed how far the series had come since the beginning. For as much as I'd like to say the hot streak keeps on rolling, that could not be further from the truth. Sonic 3 takes a nosedive in its third zone, Marble Garden. There are a lot of problems here. Let's start with the level design. The reliance on this big spiky board that absolutely no one will see coming never fails to get on my nerves. The top spinner gimmick is incredibly unpolished. It feels so awkward to maneuver it in such an enclosed space, and the game has no problem with completely taking away your control at a moment's notice whenever it feels like it, and it always seems like it never wants to work when you need it to. Marble Garden begins a theme of forced gimmicks that add nothing positive to the gameplay experience. The barrels of Carnival Night, the incredibly janky tunnels of Flying Battery, the pulleys of Mushroom Hill, and especially these egregious waiting fests in Death Egg. None of these serve to add to Sonic's abilities and feel just slapped together for the sake of variety. I find myself worried to explore because the zone is structured like one straight climb. So if I decide to turn around, I found myself having to redo a good chunk of the level I had already done, just because I wanted to explore. Overall, my biggest issue with Marble Garden is its sheer length and reliance on stop and go gameplay. Any chance of flow is immediately followed by some gimmick that feels incredibly out of place, or if you're just sitting there waiting for the madness to end. Frustrating level design, a tedious runtime, really unfun gimmicks that kill any sense of speed. Marble Garden fails on all fronts, and for me is the absolute lowest point of the whole game. Things certainly pick up in Carnival Night Zone. While keeping with a more enclosed space, I feel the level design is far less intrusive. The stop and go aspect of Marble Garden has been greatly turned down for only a couple brief sections, and the moment to moment gameplay is simply a lot more enjoyable. I don't mind when Sonic decides to slow down if that also means the level design still remembers what makes Sonic so fun. High speed sections and exploration is incentivized rather than punished. The pinball-like gimmicks akin from Casino Night are pretty tolerable, and the overall aesthetic of the zone does a lot of heavy lifting if I'm being honest. I could do without the obsessive crush blocks in Act 2, but it's not enough to break the zone for me. This seems to be the best time to talk about Knuckles' unique playthrough in Sonic 3. To put it simply, I found that his playthrough was a lot more frustrating in the simplest of terms. I felt the amount of random garbage was cranked up far too much for my liking, and Carnival Night Act 1 was the lowest of the lows. For some unknown reason to me and scientists alike, they decided to give you no rings for the mini-boss. And said mini-boss, which are usually complete jokes, however this fight is so damn clunky, And if you die, you either have to slug all the way back here, or just wing it without rings and hope for the best. Dude, just like doing this fight over and over again drove me insane. It took up 25% of my total Knuckles gameplay footage. God, I lost touch with reality that session, let me tell ya. Flying Battery is clearly trying to follow in the footsteps of Carnival Night, but I think it feels a lot closer to Marble Garden than I was hoping for. Act 1 is pretty fun, some decent platforming, a few alright gimmicks, nothing too crazy or intrusive. However, Act 2 is where I find it falls flat on its face. The waiting is insanely more abundant. These slow moving cylinders are just horrible in every sense of the word. The act just feels so sluggish by comparison. Not helping matters this incredibly dull waiting section at the end. I mean, it was bad enough in Marble Garden. Did we really need more? It is clear to me that Flying Battery wants to be an ice cap or a lava reef so bad. A slower, more enclosed area with a greater emphasis on platforming. However, these zones are able to keep my attention because I'm not just waiting around for things to happen. Some light puzzle solving and some alright gimmicks keep the pace going. It may be linear, but I'm not bored while going through it. In the case of Ice Cap, it also helps that Act 2 completely opens up, adopting the Angel Island approach of verticality and a keen sense of exploration and speed. Mushroom Hill marks the halfway point in the adventure, and this acts as a perfect time to talk about how Sonic 3 separates itself from its contemporaries. When regarding the Chaos Emeralds, since Sonic 3 was split into 2 games, it wouldn't make sense for the players of Sonic 3 to have to recollect all the emeralds they had already collected when playing Sonic and Knuckles. So the 7 Super Emeralds were introduced to alleviate this problem, providing 7 additional special stages to conquer. This is one element that elevates Sonic 3 over its contemporaries for me, as once you got all the Chaos Emeralds in Sonic 2, which could be done in the very first zone, it meant that exploration lost a lot of its inherent value. However, now that the Super Emeralds only become attainable once reaching Mushroom Hill, it means that exploration never loses its value. No matter how fast you were able to gather the Chaos Emeralds before reaching Mushroom Hill, each player will be at the same playing field. Throughout the entire adventure, the hunt for giant rings is always put at the forefront, and I love that. While I wouldn't say any of these were considerably harder than the first 7, just having 7 additional new special stages to conquer keeps me at my toes. That is, with one key exception. Obtaining the blue Super Emerald was deceptively tricky. The timing on some of these jumps was quite the challenge to overcome, and if you do mess up, it won't just simply eliminate you. No. They send you to the pit of shame. I mean, come on, look at this. It's so insulting. Obtaining all Super Emeralds will net you everyone's favorite epileptic seizure. Hypersonic. Basically, Supersonic on crack. Very cool. I'm probably the only person on Mobius who actually really enjoys Sandopolis Zone. Act 1 is a real highlight, building upon the foundation of Launch Base and Mushroom Hill. I like the slower feel of Sandopolis, as it makes it easier and more convenient to explore, as I'm not constantly being pushed forward for the sake of speedy action. It makes me really want to master the act and use its unique traversal opportunities to reach wherever I feel like going. The sinking sand is a cool feature too. It always felt so rewarding to test my luck and be rewarded for my curiosity. It's the type of act where I will spend up to 5 minutes in it purely because I choose to do so, which for me separates a good long act like Sandopolis compared to the bad long acts of Marble Garden, where I have very little control over how long I will have to endure both its long acts. While I do understand why Act 2 gets a lot of hate, it's always been hard for me to come to the same conclusion. I love the idea of navigating through an underground pyramid. Maybe that's my Mario background and why I don't have a problem with the sudden jarring change of pace that turns many people off from its unique quirks. Though, one thing I can't defend is the never-ending slide of doom near the start of the level. that even I feel is completely out of place. The solution isn't very practical at all, as each time I come back to Sandopolis, I never remember the right way to go about it. But I just think Act 2 is such a cool set piece that I'm not able to rip into it probably how you would expect me to. Similar to Ice Cap Act 1, the atmosphere is such a key reason as to why I enjoy both. Visually, musically, for me, Sonic doesn't have to be one thing all the time, and I will proudly stand as the #1 Sandopolis defender. From here on, the climax of the adventure takes center stage. After Sandopolis, you fall deep down below into the fiery rocky caves of Lava Reef. Knuckles chucks you to the deepest depths of the lava's core. Here you can see the Death Egg light up and be reborn in the background. After taking out Eggman, you make your way to the Hidden Palace. Knuckles is tired of running and wants to take you out once and for all. After he fails, the palace begins to crumble as the Master Emerald is stolen by Eggman. Realizing he was tricked, Knuckles forms an alliance of our heroes, showing our heroes the teleporter to Sky Sanctuary. From here, it's a mad dash to reach the Death Egg. It's clear there's no time to waste. Eggman has managed to successfully raise the Death Egg high up into the sky, and only you can stop him. Eggman chucks everything he has at you, the toughest badniks yet. A brand new Mecha Sonic who has a knack for rehashing. All this because Eggman clearly knows what you are capable of. The Death Egg is certainly the best final zone the series has seen yet. Perfect mix of challenging, but fair. The electric shield gets some clever uses for skipping some weighting, and Act 2's anti-gravity gimmick is pretty fun to play around with. After the most goddamn tedious boss yet, the Death Egg robot is reborn. However, this time around, if you had rings beforehand, they aren't taken away from you. This is perfect as those who are skilled keep their advantage, but the fight also keeps its tension as one death will set you back to square one. First phase is very simple. Just knock out his fingies. Second phase is a little tricky, but once you figure out the timing on this laser, then it's no problem. Phase 3 sees you chasing after Eggman, hauling away with the Master Emerald. This part will probably kill you as you gotta be jumping constantly, which you probably won't infer on your first go around. But with that done, that concludes... Not just yet, as if you get the 7 Chaos Emeralds, for the first time in the series, a true final supersonic boss fight. The Doomsday Zone. Well, not hard at all. The spectacle carries the hell out of it. I mean, just look at this. Speaks for itself. And with that done, and the Master Emerald safely returned to Angel Island, that concludes Sonic the Hedgehog 3. And Knuckles! Sonic 3 is a landmark entry in the franchise for good reason. It pushed the series into telling ambitious stories that has defined the character to this very day. There's a reason Sky Sanctuary was chosen to represent Sonic 3 in Generations. It's iconic as hell. That moment was insane for a Genesis game with no dialogue in 1994. Everything about Sonic 3 screams boundary pushing. The ambitious visual storytelling, the fantastic soundtrack, the level design. Hell, people are still going on and on about Hypersonic. Sadly, Sonic 3 is the last of its era, and it certainly went out with all it had. Its ambition does falter a bit, as the level design it clearly wants to standardize wasn't completely standardized. Even in the biggest Sonic game yet, you could tell there was still room for improvement. While I don't love Sonic 3, it is easily my favorite of the classics and a joy to come back to each and every time I do. That will do it for everything I have to say regarding Sonic 3. As always, please consider liking and subscribing as it helps me out a hell of a lot and won't take much of your time. As always, I hope we see you next time and have a lovely day.